I gave up my home, my savings, even my name to help them. On my 65th birthday, my daughter said, "You're just a burden." That night, I moved out with one bag and started building a case. Before we begin, please subscribe, and I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? You're just a burden. On the day meant to celebrate my life, my daughter chose to end it. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window of the modest 2-story house in Crescent Hill, Montana, casting long shadows across the cluttered countertop where I quietly made my shopping list. Today was my 65th birthday, though I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I kept hoping they'd remember on their own, the way families used to do things. I've been living with Jenna and Travis for 5 years now, ever since I sold my own home to help them with their mortgage. Seemed like the right thing to do after Linda passed. A father should help his children, shouldn't he? At least, that's what I told myself when I signed over the deed and moved into their spare bedroom. The house felt different this morning, quieter somehow, despite Jenna's phone buzzing constantly on the kitchen island where she sat, thumb scrolling through whatever crisis demanded her attention at the marketing firm. At 38, she'd grown into the kind of woman who wore her ambition like armor, all sharp edges and calculated moves. Nothing like the little girl who used to climb onto my lap and ask me to read the Sunday comics. "Jenna," I said, folding the shopping list carefully. "Think you could drive me to Crescent Market today? I want to pick up some things for a barbecue." She didn't look up from her phone. "I'm not your chauffeur, Dad." The words hit harder than they should have. I cleared my throat and tried again. "It's just that I thought maybe we could have a few friends over. You know, for my birthday." That got her attention. She finally lifted her eyes, and I saw something cold there, something that reminded me of her mother during Linda's worst moments. But where Linda's anger came from pain, Jenna's seemed to come from somewhere deeper, more calculated. "You're just a burden on our shoulders. You know that?" The shopping list crumpled slightly in my grip. 20 years of mortgage payments, wedding expenses, college tuition, car down payments, and startup funding reduced to 4 words. A burden on their shoulders. Travis chose that moment to walk into the kitchen, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing the same ratty Stanford t-shirt he'd had since his failed app company folded 3 years ago. At 40, he carried himself like a man who'd convinced the world he was still 25 and full of potential, when really he was just full of excuses. "What's all the noise about?" he asked, opening the refrigerator and staring into it like it might magically produce the motivation he'd been lacking. "Your father-in-law wants us to chauffeur him around for his little birthday party," Jenna said, her voice dripping with the kind of passive aggression she'd perfected over the years. Travis turned around, and I saw him process the situation with that calculating look he got whenever money was involved. "Jesus, Henry, you're acting like this is a damn country club. This is our home. Our home, not my home, despite the fact that my name was still on half the paperwork from when I'd helped them buy it. Despite the fact that I'd been paying the property taxes for 3 years running, while Travis figured things out. "You don't pay rent," Jenna continued, building momentum like she'd been storing up this speech for months. "You don't contribute to the bills, and now you want to play host?" I didn't shout. I never shout. Instead, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd had 10 years ago when I signed over my house deed to them after Linda's funeral. The memory flashed through my mind. Standing in that lawyer's office, Jenna's hand on my shoulder, her voice soft with what I'd thought was love. "Dad, we'll take care of you. Family takes care of family. I never asked for much, but I gave them everything." Without a word, I put on my coat. The morning air was sharp against my face as I stepped outside, and I heard Jenna's voice follow me through the closing door. "Don't play the victim, Dad. We've all made sacrifices." On the kitchen counter, an unopened birthday card from Mrs. Blake next door sat forgotten. the only acknowledgement that this day meant anything at all. They didn't kick me out. They made it impossible to stay. The cab ride to Crescent Market was quiet, except for the soft hum of the radio playing some old country song I didn't recognize. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and calloused hands, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Special occasion?" he asked, nodding toward the shopping list I held in my lap. "Just a barbecue," I said, then added quietly, "Birthday, actually." He smiled. "Well, happy birthday, then. Name's Doug, by the way. Doug Kramer. Henry Clayton, and thanks." At the market, I moved through the aisles with purpose, selecting premium steaks, fresh corn, and a bag of charcoal. The total came to $87.43, paid from an envelope of cash I'd prepared earlier that week. The young cashier, his name tag reading Eli, helped bag my groceries with the kind of careful attention you don't see much anymore. "Happy birthday, sir," Eli said as he handed me the receipt. "Hope it's a good one." If only he knew. Doug was waiting outside, leaning against his cab. "How about I give you a ride back? No charge for the birthday boy." The house was silent when I returned. Jenna's car was gone, and Travis was nowhere to be seen. Perfect. I carried the groceries to the kitchen and began my preparations with the kind of ritual precision that Linda used to tease me about. "Henry," she'd say, "you set that table like you're expecting the Queen of England." I pulled out the china we'd received as a wedding gift 42 years ago. White porcelain with tiny blue flowers around the rim. Linda had insisted we save it for special occasions, and after she died, I'd kept it wrapped in tissue paper like a shrine to better times. Today felt special enough. The backyard grill hadn't been used in months. I cleaned it thoroughly, arranged the charcoal in a perfect pyramid, and set up the folding chairs I'd found in the garage. Everything had to be just right. If this was going to be my last birthday in this house, and somehow I knew it would be, then I wanted to do it properly. A memory surfaced as I worked. Linda's last birthday, 3 years before she died. I'd burned the ribs so badly they looked like chunks of charcoal, and she'd laughed until tears ran down her cheeks. "Henry Clayton," she'd said, "you're many things, but a grill master ain't one of them." We'd ordered pizza instead and eaten it off the good china, drinking wine straight from the bottle like teenagers. I was lighting the grill when I heard the front door slam. Jenna's voice carried through the house, sharp and irritated, followed by Travis's deeper mumble. Their footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, and then they were standing in the doorway to the backyard, staring at my carefully arranged table and the grill beginning to smoke. Jenna's arms were folded across her chest, her mouth set in that thin line I'd learned to recognize as trouble. "What the hell is all this?" "I told you this morning," I said, not turning around from the grill. "It's my birthday. I thought I'd make dinner for a few friends." "What friends?" Travis asked, and there was something nasty in his voice. "You don't have any friends, Henry. You just have us, and we're tired of pretending this works." I turned around then. Really looked at them. Jenna was wearing a new dress, something expensive looking that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Travis had that smug expression he got whenever he thought he was being clever. They looked like a team, united in their certainty that I was the problem. "Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live," Jenna said. And there it was. The words I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. I stared at them for a long moment, feeling something shift inside my chest. Not surprise, exactly. More like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. All those years of support, all those checks written and bills paid, all those times I'd bitten my tongue when they treated me like an inconvenience in my own life. It had all led to this moment. "Fine," I said. Just one word. But it carried the weight of 20 years of disappointment. I turned off the grill and walked past them into the house. Jenna muttered something under her breath that sounded like, "finally." But I didn't stop to ask her to repeat it. Upstairs in my room. Their spare room, I corrected myself. I pulled out the same weathered suitcase I'd used for business travel, back when I had a career that mattered. The leather was worn smooth in places, and one of the corners was scuffed from a rough baggage handler in Denver sometime in the 90s. I packed methodically. Shirts folded with military precision, toiletries in a zippered bag, the few photographs I couldn't bear to leave behind, including the framed picture of Linda from our 25th anniversary. I wrapped it carefully in a flannel shirt, my hands lingering on her smile. Another memory. Alice's wedding 6 years ago. The $28,000 bill that nearly broke me, but I'd paid it anyway because Jenna had looked so happy planning every detail. She'd hugged me that day, really hugged me, and said, "Thank you, Daddy. You always come through for us." That was the last time she'd looked at me like I mattered. The suitcase closed with a soft click that sounded final. I carried it downstairs, where Jenna and Travis were sitting on the couch, pretending to watch television. I set the house key on the coffee table with a distinct metallic sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet room. Travis didn't even look up from his phone. Jenna glanced at me with something that might have been concern, or maybe just curiosity. "Where are you going to go?" she asked. "Out," I said. The front door opened to cold Montana air and the sound of wind moving through the pine trees that lined the street. I didn't look back. Doug was waiting at the curb, like he'd known I'd need him. "Pineview Lodge Motel," he said before I could speak. "It's clean, quiet, and the manager's a decent guy. $28 a night. Weekly rates available." Room 12 was in the back, away from the road noise. The key was real metal, not one of those plastic cards, and it turned with a satisfying weight in the lock. The room was small but clean, with a floral comforter that had seen better days, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. I unpacked with the same care I'd used to pack, placing Linda's photograph on the nightstand where the lamplight would catch her face. Then I lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in years, the silence felt like relief. When your daughter calls you useless, it stops being a family and starts being war. I woke up the next morning more rested than I'd been in months. The motel bed wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No footsteps pacing overhead at midnight. No muffled arguments through thin walls about bills and blame. Just silence. And for the first time in years, silence felt like freedom. My phone had been buzzing all night. 17 missed calls from Jenna, 9 from Travis, and a string of text messages that ranged from angry to panicked to downright nasty. I screenshotted every single one and saved them in a folder I labeled "For Later." 20 years of keeping the peace had taught me the value of documentation. The motel had a small desk by the window, and I claimed it as my workspace. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing what I called the ledger. Not just the money I'd given them over the years, but every emotional betrayal, every moment they'd made me feel like an intruder in what used to be my own life. The numbers were staggering when I laid them out in black and white. College tuition for Jenna, $43,000. Travis's first startup loan, $25,000. The down payment on their house, $60,000. Car payments, medical bills, vacation expenses, Christmas gifts, birthday parties, emergency repairs. It all added up to over $300,000 across 20 years. I found a shoebox in my suitcase filled with thank you cards I'd saved over the years. Most were still in their envelopes, unopened. The few Jenna had bothered to write were brief, perfunctory. "Thanks, Dad. You're the best." Form letters from a daughter who'd learned early that gratitude was just another transaction. Around 10 in the morning, Doug knocked on my door. "Thought you might need a ride somewhere," he said. "Coffee shop, maybe? Bank?" I looked at him for a long moment. "How'd you know I'd need to go to the bank?" He shrugged. "My old man went through something like this with my brother. Same look in his eyes you got. Sometimes a man's got to draw lines in the sand." First Trust Bank was a 10-minute drive through downtown Crescent Hill. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes and a professional smile, processed my requests without question once I showed my ID and account authority. Remove authorized users Jenna Clayton and Travis Reed from all credit accounts, I said, sliding the paperwork across the marble counter. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. That'll take about 24 hours to process, Mr. Clayton. I also want to freeze joint account access and create a new single-user account. More typing, more forms to sign. With each signature, I felt a small knot in my chest loosening. For too long, I'd been funding my own mistreatment. No more. Back at the motel, I transformed room 12 into what Doug jokingly called my war room. Laptop on the desk, documents organized by theme, education, housing, business loans, medical expenses. Post-it notes covered one wall like a crime scene investigation, connecting names to dates to dollar amounts. It looked obsessive, but it felt like clarity. I was reviewing bank statements when my phone rang. Jenna's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "My card just got declined at Nordstrom," she screamed before I could say hello. "Are you out of your mind?" "Yesterday, I was your burden," I said, my voice calm as winter air. "Today, you're trying to spend my money on shoes." There was a pause. Then Travis's voice came on the line. He must have grabbed the phone. "You can't just cut us off, old man. We have legal rights. You should have thought of that before you turned my home into a prison." "This isn't over," Travis said, his voice shaking with rage. "You'll regret this. We'll take you to court. We'll have you declared mentally incompetent. You can't just—" "Watch me," I said, and hung up. The phone buzzed with more calls, more texts, more threats. I turned it face down and walked outside. The afternoon air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. Doug was sitting on the motel steps, smoking a cigarette and reading a paperback western. "How'd it go?" he asked without looking up. "Like cutting off a gangrenous limb," I said. "Painful, but necessary." He chuckled. "My dad used to say that some people don't deserve good men like you, but the world still needs them." That evening, I started writing in earnest. Not just lists and ledgers, but the whole story. Every birthday they'd forgotten. Every holiday I'd spent walking on eggshells. Every time they'd made me feel like a guest in my own life. I wrote about Linda's funeral, how Jenna had cried beautifully for the cameras, but complained about the catering bill in the car. I wrote about Travis's endless string of failed businesses, each one funded by my retirement savings, and justified by his promises to pay me back when things turned around. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the words blurred on the page, until 20 years of silence finally found its voice. The next morning brought Travis to my door. I was sitting outside room 12, drinking coffee from a paper cup and watching the sun climb over the Rockies, when his pickup truck roared into the parking lot. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows and stormed toward me, his face red with anger. "You've lost your damn mind," he shouted, loud enough to wake half the motel. "You think you can just cut us off? Ruin our lives? We've got lawyers, Henry. We've got options." I stayed seated, didn't even set down my coffee. "I'm done paying to be mistreated." "You self-righteous son of a—" Travis lunged forward, grabbing my shirt and hauling me to my feet. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Part of me almost hoped he would. It would make everything so much simpler. But Doug appeared from nowhere, moving with the kind of quick efficiency that spoke of military training. He grabbed Travis by the arm and shoved him back hard enough to send him stumbling. "This man's under my protection," Doug said, his voice deadly calm. "You throw punches here, you'll be picking your teeth out of the gravel." Travis looked between us, his chest heaving. All the fight seemed to drain out of him at once, replaced by something that looked like panic. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "My business is failing. Jenna's career is hanging by a thread. We can't handle this right now. We need— You should have considered that before betting your future on mine, I said. In his desperation, Travis made a mistake. We were going to refinance the house in your name again, he blurted out. We had it all set up. We weren't going to tell you, but the payments would have been automatic and— He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted. But it was too late. I'd been recording the conversation on my phone from the moment he started shouting. That night, I sat in my motel room and deleted 20 years of saved voicemails, birthday wishes, Christmas greetings, brief updates from the road when Jenna was in college. I listened to each one before I erased it, saying goodbye to the daughter who'd loved me once upon a time. The last thing I deleted was a letter Jenna had written me from college, the one I'd carried in my wallet for 15 years. Thank you for being the only parent who stayed, it said in her careful handwriting. I know it would have been easier to leave after Mom got sick. But you didn't. You never do. I'm so lucky to have a dad like you. I held the letter over the wastebasket and watched it flutter down like a white flag of surrender. She left me long before I left that house, I said to the empty room. The next morning, I walked into Morrison and Blake Law offices with my documentation, my recordings, and a clear sense of purpose. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, looked up from her computer. I need to see someone about rewriting my will, I said. Not just changing names. I want to erase them completely. They wanted me gone. Fine. I'd vanish, along with every cent they thought they owned. James Morrison was everything you'd expect from a successful estate attorney. Sharp suit, firm handshake, and the kind of calculating eyes that missed nothing. His office overlooked Main Street, all mahogany and leather-bound law books that probably cost more than most people's cars. But when I spread my documentation across his conference table, he leaned forward with genuine interest. Mr. Clayton, he said, flipping through bank statements and printed emails, this isn't just a will rewrite. This is a legacy overhaul. I'd brought everything: receipts, documentation, text message screenshots, voicemail transcriptions, even Travis's recorded confession about the secret refinancing scheme. Morrison reviewed each piece with the methodical precision of a surgeon. Here's what I propose, he said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. We redirect all assets, life insurance, investments, retirement accounts, proceeds from any property sales, to a charitable foundation, something that reflects your values. The Linda Clayton Fund, I said without hesitation, for seniors abandoned by their families. Morrison smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. If your daughter can't honor her mother's name, then others will. I like that. The will revision was more comprehensive than I'd imagined. Jenna and Travis wouldn't inherit a single penny, not even the symbolic dollar that lawyers usually leave to prevent challenges. Every asset would flow to the foundation, creating a permanent monument to the woman who'd actually loved me unconditionally. Now, Morrison said, sliding another set of documents across the table, let's talk about protection. Based on what you've shown me, I recommend a restraining order if their threats escalate. We should also consider forensic accounting of all joint accounts from the past 5 years. If there's fraud, we need to document it. The next few days blurred together in a montage of bureaucratic revenge. I cut up every joint credit card with the kind of satisfaction other men might get from chopping firewood. At the DMV, I updated my address and removed Jenna and Travis from my emergency contact listings. I bought a new prepaid phone under a different name, cutting their last lifeline to my daily existence. But the most liberating moment came at Murphy's Cafe, a quiet diner on the edge of town where I'd arranged to meet Jim Harper, one of the few genuine friends I had left. Jim was pushing 70, a retired mechanic with hands that still bore the permanent stains of honest work. He'd known Linda and me since we'd moved to Crescent Hill 30 years ago. You look different, Jim said, studying my face over his coffee cup. Lighter somehow. I feel different. For the first time in years, I'm not pretending everything's fine. We talked about Linda, about the early days when Jenna was young and still thought I hung the moon. Jim had always been direct, never one to sugarcoat uncomfortable truths. Linda used to worry about Jenna, he admitted. Said she had a cold streak, even as a kid, always calculating what she could get out of people. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Jenna's name flashed on the screen, and something mischievous sparked in my chest. Without thinking, I placed the call on speaker right there in the middle of the cafe. "Where the hell is our Hawaii trip?" Jenna's voice exploded from the phone, loud enough to make heads turn at nearby tables. "The hotel called saying everything's been canceled. Are you completely insane?" The cafe went quiet, conversations dying as patrons turned to listen. I felt a moment of embarrassment, then realized I had nothing to be ashamed of. "I canceled it," I said calmly. "All of it. The flights, the hotel, the spa packages you booked with my credit card." "You're ruining our lives," she screamed. "I saved your lives. You just didn't like the terms." An elderly woman at the corner table began clapping softly. Others joined in, not mockingly, but with understanding. A quiet man near the window muttered, "Wish I had your spine when my son did the same thing." That evening, I discovered something I hadn't expected. I wasn't alone. Online forums for estranged parents revealed hundreds of stories mirroring mine. Years of financial support followed by sudden rejection once the money stopped flowing. I posted my story anonymously, and within hours, the comment section exploded with support. "You're brave," wrote someone called Montana Mom 47. "I wish I'd stood up to my daughter years ago." "Document everything," advised Dad in denial. "They'll try to paint you as the villain. Don't let them." The validation was intoxicating. For years, I'd wondered if I was being too sensitive, too demanding. These strangers confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. I wasn't crazy. I was just tired of being treated like an ATM with feelings. Morrison called 3 days later with an unexpected opportunity. "I've got a friend who runs a nonprofit for elderly abuse prevention. They need a part-time administrative assistant, 15 hours a week, mostly helping other seniors document financial exploitation. Interested?" I started the next Monday. The Crescent Hill Senior Advocacy Center operated out of a converted house near downtown, and my job was simple: help elderly clients organize their paperwork, document patterns of abuse, and connect them with legal resources. For the first time in years, I had purpose beyond writing checks for other people's dreams. The work was emotionally draining, but deeply satisfying. I met Margaret, whose son had forged her signature on a reverse mortgage; Frank, whose daughter had cleaned out his savings account while he was recovering from surgery; Sarah, whose grandson had stolen her identity to open credit cards. All of them thanked me for listening, for believing their stories, for helping them fight back. It felt good to be useful again, to use my experience for something meaningful. That night, I sat in my motel room and played an old voice memo I'd found on my phone, a 30-second message Linda had left me years ago on my birthday. Her voice was weak but warm, touched by the illness that would take her 2 years later. "Happy birthday, love. You always take care of everyone. Don't forget to take care of you." I listened to it 3 times, then finally exhaled as if I'd been holding my breath for years. Linda would have understood what I was doing. She would have supported it. The next morning brought a manila envelope slipped under my motel door. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Patterson and Associates, representing Jenna Clayton and Travis Reed. They accused me of financial coercion, elder manipulation, and intentional disruption of household stability. I read the letter twice, then did something I hadn't done in months. I laughed. hard, uncontrolled laughter that echoed off the motel walls and probably woke my neighbors. The absurdity was perfect. They were accusing me of elder abuse for refusing to fund their lifestyle. I walked to the window, opened it wide to let in the crisp mountain air, and looked out at the sunrise painting the peaks gold and orange. Somewhere in town, Jenna and Travis were probably panicking, trying to figure out how to pay their bills without my safety net. Somewhere else, a lawyer was billing them $300 an hour to write threatening letters. "They want a war," I said to the empty room, still grinning. "Now they'll have it, with documentation." They took my house, my peace, my name. I took back my worth. Morrison read through Patterson and Associates' cease and desist letter with the kind of predatory smile that reminded me why I'd hired him. He set it down on his desk and leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled like he was planning a chess move 10 steps ahead. "They're desperate," he said, tapping the letterhead, "and we're already 10 steps ahead of them." Within 48 hours, we'd drafted a countersuit that would have made Sun Tzu proud. Morrison laid out our strategy like a general preparing for battle. We were alleging long-term financial exploitation, backed by documentation of over $300,000 in transfers over 15 years. Bank records, receipts, email confirmations of tuition payments, car purchases, mortgage assistance, Travis's failed startup funding, medical expenses. Everything meticulously cataloged and cross-referenced. But the crown jewel was Travis's recorded confession about the secret refinancing plan. Morrison had it professionally transcribed and notarized, turning his moment of desperation into legal dynamite. "We're also requesting a restraining order and subpoenaing their financial records," Morrison explained, sliding papers across his desk. "If they want to play hardball, they'll discover they brought a water pistol to a gunfight." The media component was Morrison's idea, and it was brilliant in its subtlety. He knew Maya Bennett, a journalist who wrote a weekly column for the Crescent Hill Gazette about elder abuse and family exploitation. Morrison suggested a quiet conversation about the broader issue, using my case as an anonymous example. "I won't use names," Maya promised when we met at Murphy's Cafe. "But this story needs to be told. Too many seniors suffer in silence because they're ashamed to admit their own children are robbing them blind." The article ran the following Wednesday under the headline, "Retired Montana Man Left Homeless After Decades of Support," by his own daughter. Maya had crafted it beautifully, focusing on the broader issue while letting the specifics of my situation speak for themselves. The online comment section exploded with similar stories, creating a digital support group of the financially abused. But my real victory came when Morrison called with an update on our investigation. "Remember how you mentioned they were always talking about buying a vacation home?" he asked. "Well, my investigator found something interesting. Travis has been using your credit cards to pay for luxury items he then sells online. We're talking about $15,000 worth of unauthorized purchases over the past 6 months. The evidence was damning. High-end electronics, designer handbags, expensive watches, all purchased with my cards, then resold through various online platforms. Travis had been essentially laundering my money through retail arbitrage. We're adding identity theft and fraud to the countersuit, Morrison said. This just became a criminal matter. With Morrison's encouragement, I took another step toward reclaiming my independence. I bought a house. Sarah Mitchell, Crescent Hill's top realtor, showed me a modest ranch on Hillside Drive that overlooked the Swan Mountains. It was perfect. Single-level, clean lines with a front porch that caught the morning sun, and a view that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with Montana in the first place. It has good bones, Sarah said as we walked through the empty rooms. So do I replied, and meant it. I paid cash, $320,000 from my retirement savings and investment accounts. No mortgage, no co-signers, no one else's name on the deed. For the first time in 5 years, I owned something that was truly mine. Moving in was liberating in its simplicity. I took nothing from Jenna and Travis's house. Everything there felt tainted by years of resentment and manipulation. Instead, I bought new furniture, new dishes, new everything. Linda's photograph found a place of honor on the mantel, surrounded by fresh space and clean air. The house became my base of operations, but my real work was happening in the community. The Senior Advocacy Center had connected me with a network of discarded elders, men and women whose adult children had treated them like expired credit cards. I started speaking at weekly support group meetings, sharing my story and offering practical advice. Document everything, I'd tell them. Save every text message, every voicemail, every receipt. The truth is your most powerful weapon, but only if you can prove it. One evening, while organizing files in my new study, I found something that nearly broke my resolve. An old voicemail from Jenna when she was 17, calling to thank me for staying home with Linda during her chemotherapy treatments. Her voice was young and sincere, full of genuine gratitude. Dad, I know it would have been easier to just put Mom in a facility, but you didn't. You took care of her, and you took care of me, and I'll never forget that. I love you. I listened to it once, my finger hovering over the delete button for a full minute. Then I erased it. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who saw me as nothing more than a funding source. Carrying the ghost of who she used to be wouldn't serve either of us. Morrison called the next morning with news that made my coffee taste sweeter. Remember the credit monitoring alerts we set up? Travis tried to open a new credit card using your Social Security number. It triggered an automatic fraud investigation with the bank. The attempted identity theft was the final nail in their legal coffin. Morrison added it to our expanding countersuit, and suddenly we weren't just talking about civil damages. We were looking at potential criminal charges. But the dominoes were already falling in other areas. Maya Bennett had received an anonymous tip about irregularities in Jenna's expense reports at her marketing firm. Someone had noticed that business meals and conference fees often coincided with personal purchases on her credit cards. The company launched an internal investigation, and Jenna was placed on administrative leave pending review. I didn't leak anything, Morrison said when I asked about the timing. But information has a way of finding the right people when justice is involved. Travis and Jenna's united front began crumbling under pressure. Morrison's investigator reported heated arguments in their driveway, loud enough for neighbors to hear. Travis was blaming Jenna for pushing the old man too far, while Jenna snapped back that if he'd handled his damn business properly, they wouldn't be facing bankruptcy. The word bankruptcy caught my attention. Morrison's investigator confirmed that Jenna had secretly consulted with a bankruptcy attorney, exploring options for discharging debts that were mounting without my financial safety net. The irony was perfect. They'd spent years treating me like a burden, and now my absence was the thing that might destroy them. 3 weeks after the countersuit was filed, Morrison called with the news I'd been expecting. Court date is set for November 15th. Are you ready for this? I looked around my study. Walls lined with documentation, evidence organized in bankers' boxes, my new life built on a foundation of truth and self-respect. I've been ready for 20 years, I said. That afternoon, I drove to Anderson's Menswear and bought a charcoal gray suit, the kind of armor you wear to battle. The tailor, an elderly Italian man with careful hands, took my measurements with professional precision. Special occasion? He asked, adjusting the jacket shoulders. Justice, I replied. Jim Harper met me outside the shop when I picked up the finished suit. He looked me up and down and nodded with approval. You look ready for war, he said. I shook my head, straightening the tie I'd learned to knot 40 years ago for my first job interview. No, Jim. This isn't war. This is closure. The courthouse doors were heavy oak, the kind that swung shut with finality. As I walked through them, Morrison beside me and Justice waiting inside. I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Forgiveness is free. Justice? That's expensive. The Crescent Hill Courthouse was packed that November morning. The gallery filled with faces I recognized from the Senior Advocacy Center and Murphy's Cafe. Word had spread through the community about the case, and it seemed like half the town had shown up to witness what Maya Bennett had dubbed the reckoning. I sat at the plaintiff's table in my charcoal gray suit, Morrison beside me with his briefcase full of ammunition. Across the aisle, Jenna and Travis looked like they'd aged 10 years in the past few months. Jenna's designer clothes were wrinkled, and Travis kept fidgeting with a pen that had long since run out of ink. Their lawyer, a nervous young man who clearly wished he was anywhere else, shuffled through papers with the frantic energy of someone drowning in evidence. Judge Patricia Hawkins called the court to order with the kind of voice that had been settling disputes for 30 years. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and her particular distaste for family exploitation cases. Morrison rose for his opening statement, and I felt a surge of satisfaction watching him work. He was like a surgeon with a scalpel, precise and devastating. Your Honor, this case is about more than money. It's about the systematic exploitation of a father's love by his own daughter and son-in-law. For 20 years, Henry Clayton gave everything he had to support Jenna Clayton and Travis Reed. When he asked for basic respect in return, they called him a burden and threw him out of the home he'd helped them buy. Morrison methodically presented our evidence, the timeline of financial transfers with every receipt, every bank statement, every canceled check. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine as he read the total: $312,467 across 2 decades. This isn't generosity gone wrong, Morrison continued. This is financial abuse, plain and simple. And when Mr. Clayton finally said enough, they accused him of elder abuse for refusing to continue funding their lifestyle. Then came the recording of Travis's confession about the secret refinancing plan. The courtroom went dead silent as his voice filled the room, admitting they'd planned to use my credit without my knowledge. I watched Travis's face go pale as his own words condemned him. The credit card fraud evidence was devastating. Morrison displayed enlarged photographs of luxury items Travis had purchased with my cards and resold online. A $5,000 Rolex, designer handbags worth $8,000, high-end electronics totaling $12,000. Each purchase had been made with my credit cards. Then the items were flipped for cash that went straight into Travis's personal account. The defendants didn't just take Mr. Clayton's money, Morrison said, his voice rising. They stole his identity, forged his credit, and treated him like a personal ATM machine. When he finally closed the accounts, they had the audacity to claim he was abusing them. Jenna and Travis's defense collapsed like a house of cards. Their lawyer tried to paint me as a controlling manipulator, but Morrison had anticipated every argument. When they claimed I'd offered the money freely, he produced text messages where they demanded payments and threatened consequences if I refused. When they suggested I was mentally unstable, he presented psychiatric evaluations showing perfect cognitive function. The character witnesses were the final blow. Jim Harper took the stand first, describing the birthday incident with quiet dignity. His voice never wavered as he recounted how they'd humiliated me in my own home, calling me a burden on what should have been a day of celebration. Doug Kramer followed, still wearing his veteran's cap and speaking with military precision. He described Travis's attempted assault outside the motel and my calm restraint in the face of physical threats. Mr. Clayton never raised his voice, never lost his temper, Doug testified. He just stood up for himself with more dignity than most men half his age could manage. But it was Maya Bennett's testimony that brought tears to my eyes. She spoke about the anonymous forum posts I'd made, the dozens of other seniors who'd found courage to fight back after reading my story. She read excerpts from letters we'd received at the Advocacy Center. Elderly people from across Montana who'd been inspired to document their own abuse and seek legal help. Henry Clayton didn't just save himself, Maya said, looking directly at me. He saved dozens of other seniors who thought they had no choice but to suffer in silence. When Jenna took the stand in her own defense, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She tried to play the victim, claiming she'd sacrificed her own dreams to take care of me after Linda died. But Morrison was ready with bank records showing she'd used my money to fund a luxury lifestyle, while I lived in their spare bedroom like a paying guest. "You called your father a burden," Morrison said, his voice cold as winter wind. "Can you explain to the court what burdens he placed on you?" "He was always there," Jenna said, her voice breaking. "Always asking for rides, always wanting to cook dinner, always trying to be part of our lives when we just needed space. So his crime was loving you too much. That's not what I meant. Ms. Clayton, in the past 5 years, how many times did you say thank you to your father for the money he gave you?" Silence. "How many birthday cards did you buy him?" More silence. "How many times did you visit him when he was sick with pneumonia 2 years ago?" Jenna's composure cracked completely. "I was busy with work. Too busy to visit the man who paid your student loans? Too busy to see the father who funded your wedding? Too busy to check on the person who gave you $300,000? Travis's testimony was even worse. He tried to justify the credit card fraud as emergency expenses, but Morrison had receipts showing the money went to luxury items and gambling debts. When confronted with the recording of his admission about the refinancing scheme, Travis claimed he'd been under stress and didn't mean it. "Mr. Reed," Morrison said, "you admitted under oath that you planned to refinance Mr. Clayton's home without his knowledge. Are you now claiming you committed perjury?" Travis's lawyer jumped up with an objection, but the damage was done. You can't take back a confession, especially when it's recorded. Judge Hawkins delivered her verdict with the kind of authority that left no room for appeal. The countersuit was successful on all counts. Jenna and Travis were ordered to repay every unauthorized charge, plus interest and penalties. The restraining order was made permanent. All legal fees would be paid by the defendants. But the real victory came when Judge Hawkins addressed the identity theft charges. "Mr. Reed, your attempt to open credit accounts using Mr. Clayton's Social Security number constitutes a felony under Montana law. I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." The courtroom erupted in quiet applause. I saw Margaret from the senior center wiping away tears, and Frank giving me a thumbs up from the back row. As we left the courthouse, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. 20 years of financial bondage had ended with a judge's gavel and a stack of legal papers. The aftermath unfolded like dominoes, falling in slow motion. Jenna lost her job at the marketing firm when the internal investigation confirmed she'd been using business funds for personal expenses. Travis's remaining clients abandoned him when news of the criminal charges became public. Their house went into foreclosure within 2 months. The for sale sign eventually replaced by a bank-owned notice that fluttered in the Montana wind like a white flag of surrender. I never contacted them again. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I focused on building something meaningful from the wreckage. The Linda Clayton Fund grew from a legal strategy into a real organization, providing resources and support for elderly victims of financial abuse. We opened an office downtown, staffed by volunteers who understood that family exploitation was often the cruelest kind of betrayal. 6 months after the trial, I received a handwritten letter from a woman in Billings whose son had been stealing her Social Security checks. She'd read about my case in Maya's follow-up article and found the courage to press charges. "Thank you for making us visible," she wrote. "For too long we've been ashamed to admit our own children were robbing us. You showed us that fighting back isn't just possible. It's necessary." That evening, I sat on my front porch, watching the sun set behind the Swan Mountains, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. The silence was complete, except for the wind moving through the pine trees and the distant sound of a train whistle echoing off the mountain sides. Jim Harper's truck pulled into my driveway, and he climbed out with the kind of deliberate movement that comes with 7 decades of honest living. "Still thinking about that fishing trip?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. I'd been putting off vacation plans for months, still getting used to the idea that my time was my own. "Where were you thinking?" "Montana's got plenty of good water, but I was thinking maybe Scotland, Ireland, somewhere cold and clean, where a man can think." I smiled, remembering the travel brochures I'd been collecting like promises to myself. "Let's make it a long one." As we sat there planning an adventure that would have been impossible when I was funding someone else's dreams, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. The future stretched out ahead of me like an unmarked road, full of possibilities that belonged to me alone. They'd thought I was just an old man with no fight left. But you don't spend a lifetime giving and come out hollow. You come out sharpened, tempered by experience, and finally ready to use your strength for yourself. Inside the house, Linda's photograph smiled from the mantel beside a small plaque that read, "In honor of dignity, earned, not given." The Linda Clayton Fund had helped 63 seniors in its first year of operation, turning one man's pain into a movement that was changing lives across Montana. As the last light faded from the sky, I walked inside and closed the door on the past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that it's never too late to reclaim your worth. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, I was exactly where I belonged: home, free, and finally at peace.